Welcome to Stitchery Stories, where textile artists share their life in fabric and thread, inspiration, techniques, disasters and delights. And I'm Susan Weeks, enthusiastic embroiderer and textile art dabbler who also loves podcasting. So take a break and enjoy our light-hearted chat, and please share with your friends so they can enjoy it too. Hi there! Trying to run a creative, crafty, arty business is a challenge at the best of times, but particularly now, it's especially so with all the changes and uncertainty that have sadly become our new normal. And whatever we can do in person is more effort, less profitable, and so much is out of your control. However, the appetite for online learning continues to grow. So if you've been putting off creating an online course, and I'm not talking about Zoom workshops here, then the time really is now. It's your time. I cut through your learning curve when it comes to creating an online course. Step by step, I guide you through a plan that works, and I teach you what to do, how to do it, what to use, so you can build and launch your course faster and easier and earn money from it sooner. Crafty Online Course Creation, your 7 steps to faster and easier digital course creation, launches at the end of June. It's been specifically designed for you creative business owners, artists and crafters, and it's especially suitable for those of you who are worried, scared about all the techie stuff. But to get started today, sign up for my Crafty Online Course Creators Workbox, which includes the Crafty Course Chat newsletter. The link is in my Instagram bio at susan.l.weeks, on my Facebook page at The Missing Training, and on the Stitchery Stories website in the episode notes for this episode. Okay, let's dive into today's fabulous episode. Hello and welcome today to our lovely guest, Tanya Bentham. Hi, Tanya.
Hello.
Oh, it's brilliant speaking to you. Tanya's another one who's been on my list for quite a while. And hooray, finally, I've got Tanya. So this is Tanya's bio. Well, I'm born and brought up in the Durham area, currently living in Yorkshire. I'm self-taught and have been doing medieval embroidery for over 30 years, starting out as part of a reenactment group, but growing to specialise in the embroidery side. I don't just use medieval images in my work. I take great pains to use the correct stitches in the correct way with the correct materials, and I even go so far as to dye a great many of my own threads in a period-appropriate way. Oh, we're going to have loads to talk about here. I take inspiration both from original pieces and from manuscripts, although I also like to play and add modern references or work modern images in a medieval way. I've been teaching for about 10 years now, mostly at the Ashmolean in Oxford, Leeds University International Medieval Congress and other museums, as well as doing talks for various groups. And I might have just written a practical guide to Opus Anglicanum, which I think is the first. All the other publications are academic. And yes, Sir Tanya is an absolute guru on Opus Anglicanum. So that is the subject of our chat today. So hello again, Tanya.
Hello.
Right. So Opus Anglicanum, let's just have a quick intro as to exactly what that is so we're not all guessing and probably getting it wrong.
Opus Anglicanum is the high art ecclesiastical embroidery of the Middle Ages. So mainly 13th, 14th century, which is what I focused on in the book. It declines after the height of the Black Death when many of the craftsmen died. And after that, you get a very debased form of it running in the Tudor period. I am planning a second book on the later period stuff, but the one I've written is the earlier style. And it's basically, I was very upset that my editor cut this from my introduction. In the words of Bananarama, it's not what you do, it's the way that you do it. It's split stitch and underside couching with gold thread, but it's the way you use the split stitch that is very, very specific. And to be true Opus Anglicanum, it must be done with a filament silk because you're relying on the way the light interacts balance with the direction of the stitch. And you really only get that light with that shine that comes from filament silk.
Right.
I think if you're going to use cotton, why bother?
Right. Okay,
you're never going to get that light.
Okay, so that's obviously a really key point. So we'll come diving back into that when we're talking about techniques, because that's actually quite interesting and makes sense of some of the things I've seen. Right, okay, so that's what Opus Anglicanum is. And so the other thing that I forgot to do before I leapt in asking you about what that was is Tanya's links, of course, as usual, will be on her episode of stitcherystories.com. And she's got a blog and a shop, and she's busy on social media and all over the place. So, yeah, you'll find her on there. Right. Okay. So what's got you excited? Obviously, your book. So we can come into that.
Well, I've just handed the book in, and shortly before I handed it in, I had this idea that I drew, and the drawing was on the mantelpiece for, there's a medieval legend of the 3 living and the 3 dead, which is that, the 3 dissolute men, young men out hunting and boozing and drinking and what have you, and they run into 3 dead kings who teach them the error of their ways. So the thing I'm currently working on primarily is an Opus Anglicanum version of the 3 living and the 3 dead, updated to the 21st century. So instead of being set in a forest, it's set under a grubby railway arch. And the 3 dead are taken from a medieval manuscript, but I've put 3 young men beside them. So one of them's got his arm around one of them and he's taking a selfie. The other one's got his back to the audience and he's graffitiing the wall behind them. And the other one's just sat on his laptop staring into the distance, paying no attention whatsoever to what's going on around them.
Right. I'm glad you've explained that, because I've seen images and I thought, what's this all about? Brilliant. So,
well, it's a very common medieval allegory that's found in churches and manuscripts, and there are lots of illustrations of it. There's even a poem as well. So it's a very medieval allegory updated to the 21st century.
With that one then, because you can never tell when just looking on the screen. So what size do you work on? Do you tend to work on a typical size?
That particular one that I'm working on is actually really big. It's because there's kind of a minimum size that you can do a face convincingly in the technique, because the stitches are tiny anyway, and you sort of get down to a point where the face gets too small to be effective. So I think that one's about, I could go measure it, but I think it's about 12 inches by 14.
Right, so it's quite a size.
It's a fair size. The drawing was on an A3 sheet.
Right, because that kind of brings back your comment about the faces and the silk. So you've obviously, the other things because obviously I stalk you on social media like I do everybody else. So you've been doing a series of faces, haven't you? There's a lot of faces been going on, and I've been quite fascinated by those where it's kind of circles, and it makes sense now what you're saying about the silk and the way it adds the structure and texture to the face, doesn't it? Therefore, I can understand that now.
I was reading something several years ago, a book called Medieval Modern. I can't remember the name of the author, and he was banging on about how Picasso was influenced by the medieval, and I really didn't get it until the next time I sat down to work on an Opus Anglicanum face, because the first thing you do is you kind of break the face up into those geometric areas, the circles on the cheek and the triangle for the nose and the block of the forehead. And you're breaking the image down into these geometrical shapes. And that's kind of like a Picasso portrait. Maori face tattoos, I think, as well, are quite similar in the way they're constructed, with the swirls on the cheeks sometimes.
Yeah, so I can see what you're saying there about the size, and that you can't do it too small because you can't get your circles in and your triangle and all the rest of it. So, yeah, therefore it has to be quite a size. Right. And so the 3 living and 3 dead, so that's something that you find all over. So what made you decide that you were going to do a modern version of it?
I don't know, it was just one of those random ideas, and I started drawing it, and the drawing, I thought, actually, that drawing's really good, and this idea is really interesting, of taking this idea and updating it. I don't know. Sometimes I don't really have a lot of motivation. I'm no good at writing artist statements because I got to think,
I don't think anybody is, are there?
Last time I had to write an official one, the guy 3 doors down is a professor at Leeds Art University, so I got him to write it for me. And then my friend, who's a barrister, who's, she's extremely proficient in bullshit, she refined it for me.
Oh, dear me. That's, it reminds me, I've got a really hilarious link I'll send you. I shan't share it on here, but you'll find it funny. Right. So, and the other thing that I found quite fascinating about seeing your progress with that is the ongoing kind of sampling and deciding, like how can I represent tarmac, and what about these bricks and all that kind of thing. So that's been quite a fascinating process to watch as well.
Well, there is a lot of texture in Opus Anglicanum. And when I say it only uses 2 stitches, there are tiny variations. I mean, I would always be the first one, for instance, to say that medieval embroidery does not use satin stitch. But when you get down to 2 or 3 millimetre bits in Opus Anglicanum, then they do actually use satin stitch. But I'm so used to working and being sort of an authenticity officer in reenactment that, if you tell a newbie you can use satin stitch, they will do 6-inch satin stitches in massive bits of wool on everything, and it's the only thing they'll use. So I'm very sort of wary of saying, well, yes, you can use it, but under very, very limited circumstances. And again, it tends to be used to maximize the sheen of the silk. So for instance, if you're depicting a crown, the jewels will be done in sort of tiny little 3-inch blocks of silk satin stitch because it enhances the shine of the silk again.
Right.
So it's really specific, the way that Opus Anglicanum uses secondary stitches. I mean, a lot of the other embroidery I do from the Middle Ages is I do a lot of laid and couched work, which is the technique of the Bayeux tapestry.
Yeah.
And you do get little bits of trellis couching in Opus Anglicanum, but they're used for textural effect. They're quite often used for seed pods because they have that lovely checky texture that looks like pine cone. And in the more debased period, then it's used, laid and couch work is used a lot, and so is trellis couching. But in the early period, it's used very, very specifically and very carefully.
Right. So that brings in, so we'll finish off. Well, I just want to go back to your book because we started talking about it and then went wandering off. So we'll come back to the book and then we'll get into getting into this in the first place and through your reenactment and stuff, because that's a real interesting story. So the book, therefore, that's does that exist now? Has it been published? Is it nearly out? Where are we at with the book's status? Let's put it that way.
It had its final edit, and we've got a cover design, and it's gone to be dealt with. I know nothing else apart from it'll be sometime in August or early September.
Right. Okay. So you've done your bit now, and it's gone off to whoever's doing whatever they're doing with it next.
I had a very specific idea in mind that it was going to be structured like an advanced course.
Yeah.
So it starts off with some very, very basic projects, and it has I did these weird expanded stitch diagrams of some of the faces where I called it Big Ed and Little Ed. And I worked 2 faces alongside each other, one in a normal size with filament silk, and the other one sort of 4 times as big, so that you could see each individual stitch as sort of like a contour map.
Right.
Because I think that's a very hard thing to grasp, is how the swirls interact with each other and how the lines need to interconnect. So it goes from a very, very basic at the beginning with this sort of deep dive into faces, which is similar to what I've been doing with my online class, where we've been doing a masterclass with 5 different faces to show different aspects of it.
Right.
And then it goes right up to the really advanced projects.
Right.
Which it just basically it gets more and more complicated through the book. And then there's a really silly project at the end just for fun.
Oh, great. And so that was an interesting point you said there, was that there isn't there's plenty of academic publications about Opus Anglicanum, but yours is a practical how to do it. This is what the stitches are. This is how you do it. This is what you use, etc., etc.
Yeah, well, it's been quite frustrating the last couple of years because I've got a Facebook Opus Anglicanum embroidery group, which is for medieval embroidery, and people have been asking regularly, why isn't there a book? And my publisher said, you're not allowed to tell anybody until we've got a cover design. Fighting on
Right. So these kind of book projects take a long time with embroidery, don't they? So so you've obviously been beavering away on this for a while.
About 2 years, but it's been a long-term plan, because when I started my WordPress blog, which was about 13 years ago, I was thinking, well, I want to get a bit of a social media following on here, and then I want to get some experience teaching and write a few magazine articles, and then I'll pitch for a book. And that was pretty much what I did.
Yeah, brilliant.
So it went on over to, I'm very good at slow planning.
Yeah, no, that's great, because
it's not procrastination and not getting around to things. I call it slow planning.
Slow planning. No, but certainly with things like books and all, anything these days, the hardest thing is building that audience to start off with. And it's kind of a bit of both. You have to build an audience, and then they kind of come to you because you're attracting them now with things, and and it's an iterative process. And as much as all the damn online gurus trivialize the just build your audience, or you just get your email thing out there and all the rest of it, actually does take a lot of time and a lot of effort.
No, you do have to treat the social media part of it as part of your job.
It is, that's right. Yes,
and you have to stay on top of it. And sometimes it's really boring and you don't want to do it.
Well, but all jobs have got some boring bits that we don't want to do, haven't they, really? But these days,
I'm not particularly sociable. I think I only do social media because of the needlework, not because I want to. I mean, this whole lockdown thing, I'd always thought I could do a career as an agoraphobic, and now I'm thinking, oh God, do I have to go out and socialise soon? Oh, no.
I do know what you mean. I work from home on my own anyway, so and I am actually. People don't realise it's quite an introvert too. So it's like, oh yeah, but it's the same thing now. Oh right, I'm running out of excuses now. I've got to go and do something.
One of the little advanced projects I'm working on at the moment is filming an Opus Anglicanum face for Lady Anne's Needlework Festival, which I was supposed to be physically attending, but it's gone online. So I'm trying to do this tutorial, and Laura and Philippa were saying, oh, well, you can always come to Appleby and stay with us for a few days and we'll do the filming while you do the sewing. And I was saying, oh, no, I can't cope with that. That's too much too soon. That's like people I've never met before and going to stay with them for days. No.
Oh, dear. Yeah, because obviously I had Philippa on a while ago, and she wasn't really sure what was happening. It's already been put off from last year. So, right, okay. Yeah. Well, I'll put the link in for the chat I had with Philippa as well, because then everyone will know what on earth we're talking about with Lady Anne's Festival.
Well, as far as I know, the plan is to do it physically next year, but they're doing an online version this year. Yeah, they've been planning it for years.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing, isn't it? All this work goes into these things, and then everything was all just stopped. But anyway, right. So that's what you're excited about and what you're busy on with. So.
I'm also working on, I've been doing a set of 6 laid and couchwork wool embroidery hangings based on the Luttrell Psalter. And I'm halfway through one of those, which I'm meaning to pick up again because I stopped it when I started writing the book.
Right. So, is that the dragons? Or is that something else?
The dragons is the second one.
Right.
I'm working on number 4 at the moment, which is peasants.
Right.
And then I want to do princes. And I want to do Saints and Sinners. Saints and Sinners will be the final one because I haven't figured out what little modern thing I want to put in it yet. The music one was a dream. There's so many modern references in that one. Yeah. The peasants one is pretty easy. I'm just about to do the ploughman's boy, and he's going to have Burberry plaid and Nike high tops. And for the princes one, the classic image that everyone knows from the Luttrell Psalter is the one of Sir Geoffrey Luttrell on his jousting horse, being armed by his wife, and he's got his heraldry all over the horse's caparisons, and I'm just going to take that heraldry and just replace it with corporate logos. Well, you laugh, but jousting was the Formula One of the Middle Ages.
Yeah, it absolutely was. It was the event, wasn't it?
Natural progression.
Yeah. No, I think that's brilliant. Yeah, you could just like Formula One. Yeah, covered in logos. Yeah. That's it. Yeah, awesome. Right, so that's plenty to keep you excited and busy anyway. Then, Tanya. So you got interested in all of this through reenactment. And was that medieval reenactment by any chance, or an earlier period? Or
when I was 15, I joined the English Civil War Society.
Right.
And I was 15 and shallow, and I wanted a pretty frock. I'd just been watching a TV series called By the Sword Divided. And my mum was very good at putting my hair in little royalist ringlets. So I joined the royalists because they had prettier frocks. As I said, 15 and shallow. But that's sort of after a couple of years, I moved into Viking and then Norman and later medieval reenactment.
Right. And
I always like the shinier side, but I don't like doing the shiny side of reenactment with polyester. It has to be exactly right. If I'm going to wear velvet, it's got to be silk velvet, because that's what they had.
Yes, very true. So the embroidery side of things, did that come from the fact that you wanted to have these nice kind of pretty dresses, and therefore you wanted to have the nice embroidery on there? Is that how you got into the embroidery side?
Yeah, pretty much. I started sort of embellishing my frocks, because with Viking reenactment back then, it was very much the thing to have elaborate embroidered clothing. And I have posted somewhere in the depths of my WordPress blog, I have posted some of my earlier work, and it's awful. Before the internet, it was really hard to find out about things find the right materials and things. I mean, people starting in reenactment now, they don't know they're born, because it's so easy to get the information and find the materials online. And, without the internet, it was really difficult.
I know. Yeah, definitely. You had to go to libraries, didn't you? And fabric, crikey. Oh.
I mean, I used to have a subscription to Durham University Library to look up articles and things.
Yeah. So you got into the embroidery side then. So ultimately, your last reenactment period was the medieval. And so what was it therefore that then you decided, I really want to focus on the embroidery, that's it?
Well, I started focusing on the embroidery long before I started the blog, really. It's just I really enjoy detailed things, and I like doing the embroidery. I'm very much sort of I'm a faffer, I'm a fiddler. I can't sit still. It drives my partner around the bend, because he'll be talking to me and I'll pick something up and start examining it, because I literally can't have my hands empty. I mean, I have knitting as basically a fiddle toy, because I can't go to the cinema and pay attention for 2 hours.
Yeah.
Because so I have plain knitting, because I can knit in the dark. And I quite like the big projects, like the literal hangings that I'm doing, because they take about a year once they're drawn out. And it's starting projects I find difficult, because that means going to a different room and finding the right materials, and that I find difficult. But once it's set up and I'm going, and I've got, a box with all the right threads next to me, that's fine. I can go out to work and be completely brain dead by the time I come back, and just sit and sew for 2 hours, because I don't have to think about it.
Right. Do you know, that's quite an interesting approach, though, isn't it? That you prefer to do big pieces, so you don't have to go through the faff of like starting something. Yeah.
Well, it's partly, it's just that it's making decisions, I think, is difficult.
Yeah, I think when you're tired and you've been making decisions all day, you really don't want to make any more about embroidery when you get home, do you?
It sounds like bragging, but it's not. I got home from work when I was working on the book, and I had to do a troubleshooting section of, apparently I was told, one of my editors said, normal embroidery books don't tell you what to do when you cock up. But one of the things I learned from teaching is there are a lot of ways people cock up in, and the same ways over and over again. So I wanted to do this troubleshooting section, and I had to recreate mistakes that were common among students. And I came back from work and I was so tired that I couldn't do it wrong. Because it's so ingrained in how to do this. So I had to wait. I had to get a good night's sleep and come to it fresh in the morning to be able to cock it up properly.
Do it wrong. It's like Les Dawson used to play with his wonky piano. That was real skill, to be able to play the piano to make it sound really bad, even though he was a very good pianist. Yeah, I always think about that. Oh, dear. Right. And then with the medieval stuff, the thing that fascinates me is, first of all, I suppose we think, it's from a long time ago, and it's quite a lot of it is based through, there's the kind of religious themes running through it as well, because it's from the manuscripts and stuff. So you'd kind of think, it might be a bit dull. But the thing that really gets me, and I find really endlessly amusing, is all the hilarious characters and creatures and things that you find. So my first question to you, because I always wonder about this, are these characters and creatures actually real, or have you kind of taken a bit of artistic license and made them up?
No, all the really weird stuff, it's all really medieval.
Right. Wow. This is hilarious. There's always these strange characters. We'll probably come to some of those, but then there's snails attacking knights, and there's rabbits and cats. There's loads of animals doing naughty things, and it's just like, what? Where's all this come from? What does it have? Does it have a meaning, or is it just pretty interesting pictures from people who had nothing else to do?
Well, I think a lot of it is just sort of schoolboy humour. There's infamously, there's one illustration from a margin of a naked woman riding on an enormous penis that she has fitted with the saddle and a bridle. And I think a lot of it is just that level of schoolboy humour. But I think also you've got things like, the rabbits.
Yeah.
Rabbits are nice, peaceful little creatures, and now they're hunting and they're beating people up. That's funny, because that's subverting the normal.
Yeah.
But there's also a thing where you can do, there's illustrations of rabbits jousting against snails. I think there's that humour of a slow thing doing something very, very fast.
Yeah.
But also there is a theory that snails represent male genitalia, and that all medieval rabbits are meant to be hares, right, and all hares were believed to be female. So you've got a bit of a gender thing going on there. Right. So, for instance, I think I sent you the photo of the bad rabbits. They're beating up a naked man.
Yes. I was looking at thinking, what's going on? I'm going to ask Tanya about this.
You could just read that as a joke, that it's, very, very bad bunnies, and medieval bunnies were really violent. Or you could read it as a comment on the war of the sexes, that, this is women who are meant to be sweet and gentle, and here they are beating up a naked man. And I think people also forget that until very, very recently, it's only the last couple of 100 years, it was perfectly legal for a man to beat his wife, as long as he didn't kill her. But for a woman to fight back, and God forbid for her to kill her husband, was considered as petty treason. So if a man did accidentally murder his wife in a fit of temper, he'd probably get away with, being put in the stocks, or a nice quick death like hanging. But the punishment for a woman was being burnt alive. We never burnt witches alive in this country, but we burnt women alive for murdering their husbands.
Wow.
That's just quite horrific.
Yeah. Crikey. And
you could see it as a comment on that sort of war between the sexes.
Well, you totally could explain it in that context, yes. You can understand. And that's the thing about kind of needlework and embroidery throughout the eras anyway, isn't it? Is that on one level, it's, oh, look, a pretty rabbit or some flowers or whatever it is. But then the other level is, yeah, well, there's a message in there. And quite often, as you say, things like that. So that's really interesting. I'm glad I asked you about that. And then there's some other, you often quite some hilarious characters going on. So again, these are all real things.
I'm in a long-term relationship with the Luttrell Psalter because it has some of the best marginalia.
Yeah.
But I do have plans for future books I would like to do, as well as the late period opus one. I would dearly love to do one on snails and bunnies, to be fair.
Right. So marginalia, it's got a name. So that's all the little doodles in the margins.
Yes. It's called marginalia.
Oh, excellent. A new word. I didn't know that. So that's absolutely fascinating, all of those kind of stories. So moving on then from those fascinating kind of stories and characters and so on, and you've talked a bit about the techniques. Now, one thing that I want to come back to is, you said in your little intro there, and I've also witnessed that, you know, on the stuff that you post on your blog and on your Facebook pages, is you're very, very correct. You've already said that. You're very, very correct about the correct stitches in the correct way with the correct materials, and then dyeing your own stuff. So that makes it all the more interesting that basically you've come through this through reenactment.
There is no nerd like a reenactment nerd. It just one of the things that makes me laugh in my relationship is my partner has a PhD in genetics from Cambridge, and he is a complete carnivorous plant nerd. I mean, he's pretty much your textbook definition of a science nerd, and he thinks I'm nerdy. He thinks I'm the nerdy one in this relationship.
Oh dear. So you've really homed in on, while you've been teaching yourself these techniques, where have you found the information?
Well, there's been a fair bit of trial and error where I've done whole projects in the wrong stitch. I mean, I found a dress when I was cleaning out a house the other day from 30 years ago, and it's a lovely medieval dress with lovely medieval embroidery on it, but it's done in modern needlepoint in pearl cotton, because that was all I could get at the time.
Yeah.
I must have been about 20 when I made it. And I'd been reading a book that was on about counted stitches in the Middle Ages, and I completely got modern needlepoint mixed up with German brick stitch, and they're two completely different techniques.
Right.
But they're both counted, and they're, you know.
Yeah.
And I just got it all mixed up.
Yeah.
So there has been a fair bit of trial and error.
Right, yeah, because it does seem quite amusing, really, in some respects, that you're so nerdy about the stitches and the techniques and the threads, and it all has to be proper. And then you've developed that yourself, as you say, through trial and error and research and all the rest of it. So I think it's like, you know, hats off to you for all of that as well. And it comes across very, very strongly as well in how you explain. I've seen you explaining to people as well in other techniques where the people say, oh, I'm not quite sure about this. Well, it's because what you need to do is, you know, you've given a really good example and an explanation of why something's puckered or why, you know, it hasn't worked, kind of thing. So I think that's always very positive as well.
Well, it is just experience, because when I started doing medieval embroidery, I had one book which explained, you know, a couple of basic stitches.
Yeah.
And then a lot of the rest of it I've had to figure out for myself. So there was about 12 years ago, I did a replica of an Icelandic altar frontal from Reykjavík in Iceland, which it's an interesting fusion, because the faces are done in silk in the Opus Anglicanum technique, and the background and the figures are all done in laden couchwork in wool. And there are little circles in the margin of that where the bars that couch it down are like the spokes on a bike. They radiate out around the circle. So it took a lot of trial and error to figure out that you have to use the laid work in a very specific and quite sophisticated way to get the bars to sit in that particular way.
Right.
So it's using stuff like that. But the Icelandic embroideries can be very interesting because they were a bit of backwater and they couldn't always afford silk. So they used these sort of fusions of the two techniques.
Right.
Between the wool and the silk. And it gives a lovely effect because it really makes the faces glow against the rougher wool.
Gives a good contrast. So, in terms of techniques there, then obviously you've explained the main stitches and so on that you use. Is there one particular thing that you really like doing that you just think, oh, great, I can do some more of that particular stitch? Or conversely, is the one that really you don't like doing at all, but have to because it's part of it?
Well, medieval embroidery doesn't have that many stitches, and for me, that's one of the charms of it. It's coming back to the Bananarama thing.
Yeah,
of its sophistication of really knowing a few stitches very, very well, as opposed to the sort of Jacobean crewel work approach of just knowing of all the stitches and just throwing them all at the piece of work.
Yeah.
I mean, I can appreciate the skill that goes into Jacobean crewel work, but I often find it a little bit unattractive because there's just too much going on for me. I really like the simplicity of medieval embroidery, but I also I quite like the playfulness of it, that you do have this very strict language to Opus Anglicanum, and then they do something naughty like using a tiny little bit of satin stitch or a really weird bonkers stitch to do a peacock's tail or something, just because it works for that one thing.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing quite as good as the odd rule breaking going on, is there? Let's face it.
No, but it's learning which rules you can break for it to still be medieval. That's quite interesting.
Yeah, and that's really, I suppose, comes from your research, your experiments, trial and error, and just doing lots of it.
Well, there's one project in the book where I did 2 sides to a medieval purse, and I took some of the biblical images from one of the copes and made them into fairy tales. So one of them is Rapunzel, and she's sitting with a lovely peacock, because peacocks are symbols of royalty, and I based it on Pienza cope. And there's the most wonderful peacock that just gets overlooked because he's sort of a filler panel. And that uses a stitch which I had to work out from sort of reverse engineering it. And it turns out it's a crewel work stitch called burden stitch. I've never heard of it. But it's not done with wool on Opus Anglicanum. It's done with gold and silk.
Right.
To make the feathering on the peacock's tail. So it's, it's weird little things like that where they introduce a new stitch and do something completely unexpected with it.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the corpus of medieval stitches go on to become part of Jacobean crewel work.
Right. So they were like expanded and extended and adapted, and off they went. And, you made that point there about the plague killing off, obviously, a lot of the people who were doing the work. So there won't have been, there's been a break in the chain in terms of passing down techniques, and the embroidery police were all killed off, weren't they? So people have kind of made it up as they've gone along, and they didn't have the internet.
There was also a huge amount of competition coming in from the continent with, the debased form originated there. I don't think it was voluntary on the part of the English embroiderers. I think it was just a case of, well, we compete on their terms or we go under, so we have to produce embroidery quicker in order to be able to compete.
Yeah.
Because all that, quicker, more debased stuff, it was coming in from the Netherlands and Germany, which have their own needlework traditions in the Middle Ages. The Teutonic stuff relies much more heavily on counted work, for instance.
Right. So the commercial pressures still existed in the 15th, 16th century, exactly the same. Yeah.
I mean, most Opus Anglicanum was done in commercial workshops.
Right.
It wasn't something people were doing at home, because I think that the handling of the silks was just too advanced and high level. And the metalwork, I've long thought that the metal portion of Opus Anglicanum, the underside couching stitch, I've long thought that would have been done by a separate person. Because, I mean, for a modern embroidery, it's quite difficult to keep your hands in good condition to work with filament silk. It's very difficult. And as soon as you start doing the underside couching, it undoes all that work because it roughens your hands.
Yeah.
So I think the gold work was, the silk was done, and then it was handed over to the gold
somebody else with rougher hands. Yeah. See, the stories to tell in all of these things, if you sit and think about it from the point of view of the people actually doing it.
Well, I had Kay Stannenland, who wrote the book, the British Museum book on medieval embroidery. She came to one of my classes once, because she'd never actually done any embroidery. She'd just written about it. and she was wanting to discuss all these very advanced technical questions, and she got me thinking on a lot of them.
Yeah. Obviously, your book is a highlight. What other things would you highlight yourself as being a highlight of the work you've created and what you've been doing, Tanya?
Well, a few years ago, I entered a competition at the Bodleian Library. It was called Redesigning the Medieval Manuscript. And we went to an open day about it. And the open day was very much focused on the production of parchment from sheepskins. And what they said was that most of the skins that were used for these great volumes of medieval literature, they were from very, very young animals. Because, of course, in traditional agriculture, you don't have a lot of use for male animals, so they were killed off at an early age. Yeah. And the skins became the parchment. So I was fascinated by, these are basically baby sheep. So I decided I wanted to write a medieval babies book. And I did it as a long scroll with a sort of ABC of medieval books. And it was very, very much that the people who were at the Bodleian Open Day, they were all very much sort of proper artists. They weren't textile artists. And I think there was me and one lady who knitted. And I thought, well, I'm going to do this. I'd gone along on it, to be honest, because they're paying your travel expenses to go to Oxford. And there was a free lunch. And I thought, I quite like Oxford. I'll have a potter around after I've, had my lunch and stuff. So I went for the free day out, basically, and just got really inspired by what we were talking about. So I decided I'd do the project and enter it anyway. And I didn't think I'd get anywhere, because there is very much a sort of thing in traditional art with, I mean, the Royal Academy, for instance, have only just started allowing needlework in.
Exactly, yeah.
So I thought I wasn't even going to get shortlisted. And I did get shortlisted. I mean, I didn't win anything, but I got shortlisted and I got displayed it in the museum. So that was a bit of a highlight.
Fabulous, yeah.
And what's really sweet is the guy from the Bodleian has kept in touch, and he says, well, do you know, when they were on display, yours was the one everybody talked about. He says, yours was the public favourite.
Fabulous. Oh, I love that. And those small victories, as it were, are all the sweeter, aren't they, because of that backdrop of you're not a proper artist, and who are you, and all of those things. So well done, and it just shows, just go try, go for the day out and try.
When I first started to go down to Oxford to teach, and I didn't know Jude Barrett at the Ashmolean very well. For weeks beforehand, Gareth, being PhD and a proper academic, he was like, you'll have to dress like a grown-up. You can't wear that shirt you wear with the tape measures on. Just dress like a grown-up. Be a responsible professional. This is Oxford University you're going to. I got there wearing my tape measure skirt, of course, and I told Jude Barrett about it. She just waved her hand. She said, oh, no, she said, no. I had Grayson Perry in here a couple of weeks ago. He was dressed as Little Bo Peep. She said, you're an artist, darling. Wear what you like.
Fabulous. Oh, that's a great story. And so then, have you any kind of stories about all of the experimenting and things that you have done where something was possibly a bit of a disaster? I mean, all that dyeing, surely there's some scope there for things to not go very well. Anything hilarious to share with us today, Tanya?
I only really dye wool, and it's no more difficult than making chicken stock, to be honest. Simmer it slowly and you go poke it and it'll be fine.
That was me thinking it was magic. Oh.
No, I mean, indigo's a bit different because you have to do a reduction vat. But I always think, things like using madder, it's just like making decent chicken stock. You just simmer it slowly and you don't stir it. That's fine. I don't think I've ever really cocked up badly with the dyeing.
Oh, well, there we are then. And what about...
that now, I'll burn something.
Yeah, I'm going to say, you'll be cursing me now for saying that. And then something else that we often have a bit of a laugh about is UFOs. I don't know if you have any unfinished objects lying around anywhere that have been on the go for years, or are you a good girl and finished them all off?
I've got two, really. I've got one which is a copy of the Bio Tapestry I was working on about 25 years ago. And I moved away from working on replicas of the Bio Tapestry for a very long time because I was doing these public demonstrations at early medieval sort of Viking Saxon events. And honestly, I got sick of people not even bothering to talk to me. They'd be like 6, 8, 10 feet away, and you just hear them go, "Oh, not another bloody Bio Tapestry," and stand off. And seriously, that happened to me more than once. I mean, I know some people absolutely love the Bio Tapestry, but as a public demonstration piece, I find it puts people off.
Wow, yeah, that would be
other things because it was different and it drew people in.
Yeah.
So I do have an unfinished Bio Tapestry piece from way back then that was just a public demo.
Yeah.
And also it's very much the fashion back then in Viking reenactment to have very highly elaborate embroidered stuff. And I was making a tunic for my now ex-boyfriend, which was supposed to be embroidered all over, and I was doing little repeat patterns all over it.
Yeah.
And I got him to just put it on halfway through embroidering it just so I could check the size.
Yeah.
And put too much weight on and he couldn't get it over his belly. So there's kind of no point in finishing that now.
Too fat for his tunic that you'd beautifully embroidered or half done.
Well, it would have been an absolute fright now because it's all wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, there's fashion in reenactment as much as there is in anything else.
Wow.
I mean, if you just look at the Viking hanger-rock dress, how interpretations of that have changed over the last 30 years. They're wildly different to what they used to be.
Yeah, things have evolved, haven't they? But I think that's one of the best excuses for a half-finished object. Your ex-boyfriend got too fat for it while he was embroidering it. Excellent story there, Tanya. Thank you for that. Oh dear. Right, and as we kind of move towards the end of our extremely fascinating chat, what have you got kind of coming up in the future? Obviously, you're going to be working hard on your kind of book marketing, really, I suppose, and all the things that fall out of that activity. So, what else are you looking forward to for the next few months?
I've got other ideas. I did propose one follow-up idea for another book to my editor, which she's quite keen on, but I don't want to start on that yet because I want to break my own project.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to talk about that. Apart from say it's a bit naughty. I want to do. I did an Opus Anglicanum because Opus is a very cartoony style. It's very stylized.
Yes.
I was interested in the idea of applying it to modern cartoons.
Oh.
So I did an Asterix and Obelix in Opus Anglicanum because they were my favourites when I was a kid.
They were brilliant. I love those books. Yeah.
I'd like to do Tintin and have a two-sided medieval purse with Asterix and Tintin.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I have it in mind, but it's just getting the time to do it. I want to finish The Three Living and the Three Dead because I think I'd like to get it finished in time and enter it into the Broaders exhibition if I can make the deadline. I want to get on with my literal Psalter hangings. I really want to do an Opus Anglicanum Death on Horseback, like a Grim Reaper. And I also, there's an Armenian 8th century manuscript on my desktop, which is Alexander the Great's horse, Bucephalus, but he's made up of other animals. It's one of the most batshit crazy medieval images I've ever seen, and I desperately want to do it as Opus Anglicanum.
Tanya's enough there to keep anybody busy for about 20 years.
The other really big project that's on the back of my mind is that one of the projects I did for the book was a project panel from the Scion Corp. And I would really like to do, maybe as a corp, but maybe just as a big panel, a Scion Corp, but with rock stars replacing saints. So, you know, Elvis and the Beatles and Kate Bush and Dolly Parton, all rendered, because I could have a lot of fun using all the modern coloured passings on those as well.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Oh, that sounds like a really good idea.
In a very medieval style, but still sort of very recognisably, just basically a rock icon's cape. I desperately want to do that, but I'll need a slightly bigger embroidery frame, I think.
Yeah, that's, wow.
That would be a 10-year project, though.
Yeah, gosh, that's a lot of stuff. So there's plenty for us to all keep following you on your Facebook page and your blog. Anyway, there's always something to look at.
More ideas than you can shake a stick at. Yeah. Terrible.
Oh, it's what keeps us going, isn't it? Having all these fabulous ideas bubbling away in the back of our heads. What would we do without them?
About 15 years ago, I did a 4-week summer school Shakespeare course at RADA in London, and the improv teacher told me I had too much imagination.
Too much imagination. Oh dear, dearie me! How can we have too much imagination? How silly! Oh dearie me! Oh, no. Well, I think on that bright note, Tanya, with the too much imagination, it's been absolutely fabulous speaking to you. I'm so glad we finally managed to get ourselves sorted out, and all of the things that you're doing and the ideas in your head and your blog's really great. I love all your blog posts and keeping us all informed what you're doing on there. Absolutely wonderful. I'll be looking forward to your book coming out. Is it August, September, I think you said? So that'll be really great as well. Brilliant highlights from you. Thank you so much, Tanya.
Okay, thank you.
It's just been an absolute pleasure talking to you. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, then please join the Stitchery Stories fan club so you can get an email when a new episode is released. It's a quick and easy way of listening and of keeping up with any news and information around this podcast. Please visit stitcherystories.com. Of course, you can listen to Stitchery Stories on plenty of podcast apps at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify and plenty more besides. You can also ask your smart speaker to play Stitchery Stories podcast too. But wherever you listen, why not leave us a rating and a review to encourage other people to listen too? I very much appreciate you taking the time to do that for me. So that is the end of our Stitchery story for today. Keep stitching, keep smiling, and keep creating your very own Stitchery stories.